think it was the second debate. And we had just done a whole day of events and activities, and I was sitting there and we're all exhausted. And we're like, let's watch the debate. And I'm like, I hate politics, I can't stand it. I've begrudgingly voted since 1992, but I've never gotten excited about anybody in my life. And I'm watching that debate, and all of a sudden, there's this woman from Hawaii who lays this smackdown on Kamala Harris, and I'm like, who is this chick? Like, I need to know more. So I start digging in, looking up all kinds of information, and like, oh, she's always on Fox News, this and that. I'm like, that's a bad thing, why? And I'm like, she meeting with controversial leaders. I'm like, that's bad, why? Like, this is what we're talking about, reaching across both parties, and you can't do that if you don't talk to them. So for me, that gained a lot of respect, and I was all in at that point. So I went to her first town hall, one of them in Nashville, New Hampshire, a church, and I asked, what can I do? How can I help you? I'm like, well, we're looking for people to do house parties. I'm like, parties? I love parties. I'm in. Next thing I know, there's 150 people in my house. And we had only planned on having them in the dining room, and they were filtered over into the den and the living room, and it was amazing. And I felt really happy because I felt somewhat responsible because I advertised the event. And at that point, my husband will tell you, when I'm all in, I'm committed. I kind of go a little bit too far sometimes. So I was like, what's next? So we had other ideas for events and what we can do and how we can raise a platform and awareness. And Tulsi called me brilliant. And I was like, oh my God, this woman's calling me brilliant? Like, she's freaking brilliant. And I'm like, I just felt so good about that, and that she just listened to my ideas. The fact that she liked them was almost irrelevant. I just really liked that she listened to what I had to say. So I want to thank you guys all for coming here. And one other thing I want to say, I know you can hear me back there, and I want to say thank you so much for waking me up, motivating me, inspiring me, and oh my God, I'm getting teary-eyed about it. That's how you know it's true. I really want to thank you for fighting for us and for all the people. She doesn't put herself through this because she loves being attacked. She does this because she's fighting for all of you and all of us. Tulsi, come on.
Yeah. Woo. Very nice to meet you.
You won't be able to hear me. Can we give Matt a round of applause?
Woo, Matt!
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. I want to say thanks to St. Anselm for hosting us all here today. And I want to say thanks to one of our volunteers, Rob. Where's Rob? Is he here? He's probably still working outside. Rob was really helpful in putting this together here today. Showed up at noon to start setting up the chairs. And with Rob, I want to say thanks to all of our volunteers who you'll meet here today, who are working incredibly hard to get our message out in this campaign. I think Matt talks a little bit in his introduction about how frustrating our political atmosphere is and how unfortunately divided our country has become. I'm here today to invite every single one of you to join me, to join our movement in ushering in a future where every single American is treated with respect, a future full of peace, national security, human dignity, and equality and justice for all. This is what our campaign is about. And this is the movement that we are building so that we together, standing side by side, working side by side as Americans, can make this future our reality. When our founders were building the foundation for this country, what they envisioned for us was a government led by people whose sole commitment was to serve the people. A government of, by, and for the people. How many of you feel here today that this is the government that we have. That's exactly right. Instead, what we have is a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful, a government of, by, and for self-serving politicians. And what we have as a result, unfortunately, is we, the people, get left behind, which is so disheartening given our founders very intentionally made those first three words of our Constitution, we, the people. Because we, the people, should always come first. We, the people, are the ones who our government should be focused solely on figuring out how do we solve problems, how do we improve the quality of life, how do we ensure that every family in this country has peace of mind to pursue whatever your dreams or hopes or opportunities are. We have a White House that unfortunately is perpetuating darkness and divisiveness. So what we need to do is to bring about this reality that our founders had for us. You know, I look back to the experience that I've had throughout my time serving in the military. April makes my 17-year anniversary. But one of the first things that I just really experienced at a deeply personal level when I first shipped out to basic training in South Carolina, you know, I came from Hawaii. We're the most diverse state in the nation. And, you know, we're out in our island chain in the middle of the Pacific. And I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and immediately I'm standing, I'll never forget, the very first day, we're in a big, huge open bay in a room not unlike this. And we were doing what the drill sergeants called toe the line. The drill sergeants walk in. How many of you served in the military? Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, right? And the drill sergeants come in, you toe the line, and you've got all these people from all over the country standing side by side in the position of attention. There's no kidding, a line painted on the ground for those who didn't know what toe the line meant. Literally toes on the line. And I just remember looking around that room and seeing America. People from all different ages, ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, all different walks of life coming together, standing shoulder to shoulder, proud, standing as one, each of us committed to that very same mission of service. That mission of service to our country. All of the things that these days are so often used to divide us, the color of our skin, the way we worship, or if we worship, or how much or how little money we make, what kind of education we may have, all of these things that are putting us into these little boxes that are separating us as Americans, all of that stuff goes away because we are standing there as fellow Americans, single-pointedly focused on that mission of service. This is the spirit of leadership that I will bring to the White House as your president. Putting service and you have my personal commitment that I will treat every single American, every one of you, with respect, with care, and with compassion, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, orientation, all of these different things, recognizing that united we stand, divided we fall. Really taking to heart those words that we just shared in the Pledge of Allegiance. These are words we say over and over again throughout our lives, and sometimes they can become easy to just repeat without really thinking about them, but gosh, they're so powerful and so necessary of a reminder, given the challenges and obstacles we are facing now, that we are one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the challenge that we have before us, to build those bridges, to cross those divides, to stand together and come together, treating each other as fellow Americans with respect, so that we can begin to have the kinds of dialogue and conversation necessary to bring about that future for ourselves, for our kids, their kids, for generations to come. That bright future that guarantees freedom and equality and justice and peace and security for every single American. Now, some critics may say, okay, yeah, Tulsi, that sounds fine, and you can talk about peace and coming together, and those are all just words. What does that mean at a practical level, given every time you turn on cable news, or you flip through Twitter, or you scroll through social media, maybe you hear some of the conversations that some of you might have had around the dinner table at Thanksgiving. It's easier said than done, right? But it begins with a very simple, both concept turned into action, treating each other with respect. This is something that I found that I had to figure out in a very practical way how to do when I first got elected to Congress in 2012. I was coming in as a newly elected Democrat representing my home state of Hawaii to a House of Representatives with a very strong Republican majority. Republicans held the majority for my first 6 years serving in Congress, but I knew right away coming in, was walking into a very hyper-partisan atmosphere. Like I'm sure all of you feel now, I felt frustrated by the gridlock in Washington that has stood in the way of solving problems for too long. And I knew that going there, I didn't want to just be a part of the problem. I didn't want to just go there and just say, Republicans are in charge, so I guess I can't get anything done. That would go against the promise that I made to my constituents in Hawaii to serve them and to serve our country and to do all I could to help solve the problems that we're facing. So it began with me just thinking, all right, how do I start to build relationships? How do I start to get to know the other 434 members of Congress from all different parts of the country so I could start to establish those relationships based on respect? I started with the most universally recognized gesture and language that I believe there is, which is food.
Yeah.
Yeah? Speak this language? Anybody here? Yeah? Yes? You do, yes? You look excited by that.
Everybody's gonna eat.
So starting with that, I called my mother back in Hawaii, who makes the most incredible macadamia nut toffee in the world. And I asked her if she would make 434 boxes of this coffee for every single member of Congress. I excluded myself from the count. I didn't need the calories. But she said, gosh, honey, I think that's a great idea. Sure, I'd be happy to help. And I said, I got one more favor on top of that. I said, can you make another 435 bigger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress? And she paused only for a moment. I could tell she was thinking about how many more bags of Mac nuts she'd have to go and buy from Costco and all the things that would be required to make that much more. But she said, absolutely, I'm in. So while she was doing that, she's in Hawaii, she's stirring 2 pots, chopping the Mac nuts, pouring the toffee. My dad is the self-appointed quality control officer. He took 1 slice out of every single pan that she poured. I'm not even joking. I was in DC while they were doing this, just starting to handwrite notes to every one of my soon-to-be new friends in Congress, learning more about them, where they come from or what committees they're serving on, and just signing every note, saying, I look forward to serving alongside you. What was incredible to me was how quickly I started to get a response. We started delivering these little gifts of aloha to the offices of every member of Congress, and when we went to the House floor for votes, which we do usually a couple times a day, it's the only time when we're all in the same space together, that some Republicans, chairmen of powerful committees, started making that long walk from the Republican side of the floor to the Democratic side, looking for me, finding me, and saying, God, thank you. I ate all the toffee. I need more to take home to my family this weekend, please. But then most importantly, saying, tell me what issues you're concerned about. What challenges are your constituents dealing with in Hawaii? I'm the chairman of this committee, or, I've been really the leader on this issue or that issue for a long time. Let's find ways to work together. This simple gesture of respect, of reaching out, without preconditions, without a purity test, without pre-vetting to say, well, I think you're good enough for me to work with, but no, I'm not going to talk to you. No, none of that. Reaching out with respect. at a basic foundational level, saying, I see you, we are fellow Americans, and we have been sent here to do a job, to solve problems for the people of this country. Whether we agree on most things or we only agree on one thing, let's work together to get that job done. And it worked. The very first bill that I introduced into Congress, when professional politicos in Washington said, don't even try to pass legislation because they won't let you get it through, the very first bill that I introduced was passed through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and signed into law by President Obama within my first year in Congress. When the time came when I was, introducing an amendment, let's say there was one to the education bill that many people said would be dead on arrival because the Republican majority had traditionally opposed other people's efforts to introduce this same legislation that would reauthorize the Native Hawaiian Education Act. I said, no, we gotta go for it. We gotta give it our best shot. There's a lot of kids who are counting on us. We introduced the amendment. It was scheduled to come to the floor for a vote. As expected, the Republican leadership put out a memo to all of their members saying, vote against the Gabbard Amendment. But instead of it just dying a partisan death on the House floor, I started getting phone calls. I started texting my Republican friends, stopping them in the halls. They started asking me, hey, we were told to vote against your amendment. Tell me why I should vote for it. The door was open for me to be able to make the case for why this legislation was good for our children. I didn't get all of them. Some of them said, hey, I'd like to support you, but I can't do it on this one. Talk to me next time. But enough of them said, yes, I will stand with you. And we passed this amendment, something they said couldn't be done by an overwhelming majority. This happened because of those relationships that were established from the beginning, not in a transactional way, saying I'm going to come and use you for my own ends to help me in my political future. No, not at all. Let us work together, treat each other with respect to fulfill our mission of service to the American people and solving problems. This is the leadership that I will bring to you as your president. Where one of the first things that I'll do is invite the leaders of the House and the Senate, Democrat and Republican, to the White House to begin to establish this relationship based on respect, much like I did in the House of Representatives. I will be sure to ask my mother to make a large plate of the toffee for that meeting. But making this so that this is the norm, as you may or may not know now, it makes headlines, right? If the president invites leaders in Congress to the White House, it's a big deal because it hardly ever happens. How terrible is that? That we have leaders in the executive branch and in Congress who aren't working together on a regular basis. Coming together, maybe having dinner, inviting their families over, getting on the phone. Hey, let's just talk about this stuff. Let's talk about this stuff. We all know people in our communities or in our states who are struggling because they can't get the health care they need. That their kids aren't able to get the medicine they need because they can't afford it. This is not a Republican problem or a Democrat problem. This is a challenge that's causing so many Americans to suffer and struggle. Let's come together and work this out. We have threats to our environment. Challenges. We have families in Flint, Michigan who years after the breaking news was all over every channel and every newspaper about families in Flint being poisoned by water, their water, they're still being poisoned today. That's not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue, and they are not the only ones who are dealing with this. That in the United States of America, we have too many people in communities, some here in New Hampshire, but all across this country who can't trust the water that's coming out of their faucets. That it's not going to poison them and make them sick. That's not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. That's a people issue. We need leaders who will put people ahead of profits, put people ahead of partisan politics, and work side by side for the best interest of the people of our country. A house divided cannot stand. We must come together as people in this country and demand more from our leaders. This is how we bring about the real systemic change that we need to see that will actually enable us to solve these problems. Because I think we can all acknowledge and agree that as much as we may disagree with so much of what this administration is doing, there are a lot of problems and a lot of people struggling in this country before November of 2016. So this election, yes, I'm committed to defeating Donald Trump, but the work that we have to do goes so far beyond that. The work that we have to do to solve these problems begins the day after that election. So we can actually get to the heart of how our government has for too long been serving the interests of the rich and powerful rather than serving the interests of the people. By bringing about this change, we can guarantee that every single American will get the quality health care that we need, no matter who we are or how little you have in your pocket or your bank account. You will be guaranteed that our healthcare system will work for the well-being of the people of this country, not to increase the profits of big insurance and big pharma. You can be guaranteed that as we look towards making sure we have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe, and that we're preserving these beautiful public spaces that we get to call home, that we're taking action to protect our environment, to transition off of fossil fuels and the $30 billion in subsidies that's going to that industry, and instead invest in our future. Invest in clean, renewable energy. Taking action that will help to further protect our environment will also help strengthen our economy. Investing in good paying jobs in this 21st century green economy. We put the well-being and the interests of the people of this country first. We can look at our priorities and how our taxpayer dollars are being spent, so that we're investing in sustainable infrastructure, so that we're bringing about finally an end to the failed war on drugs, and instead investing in treatment and recovery for those who need help. So that we're holding, finally, criminally accountable those who've been perpetrators of this opioid epidemic that has taken so many people's lives. I've introduced legislation called the Opioid Accountability Act that would do just that, put the tools into the hands of federal prosecutors to hold those like Purdue Pharma responsible, and to take the money, these profits that they have made on the backs of people's lives who've been ruined, and dedicate those dollars towards real recovery and treatment, not just for the first month that someone says, hey, I need help to put my life back together, but through that long path towards recovery of putting the pieces of your life back together. Taking those resources and dedicating them to where they're needed. When we get away from a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful, and instead a government of, by, and for the people, we can begin to bring about solutions to these age-old challenges that we've seen, whether it's regard to immigration reform, criminal justice reform, healthcare reform, dedicating resources to education to make sure our kids are getting the tools that they need when they go to school every day. These are not impossible things, and certainly not impossible for us here in the United States of America. Now, there's a lot of folks who, as we go through this campaign primary election, who have a lot of plans and a lot of big ideas. A plan is only good if you're able to execute it, if you're actually able to bring about those changes. And that will require being able to work with leaders in Congress, being able to bring people together across the country to make that change a reality. As you go down the different ideas that we hear about, and some of the things that I think we'll get into in our discussion today, we know that all these things are going to cost money. So I want to bring an issue that you won't hear often addressed, but really is at the heart of our ability to invest in all of these necessary priorities. And that issue is the cost of war. When we talk about the cost of war, there must be a recognition of the terribly high human cost of war and the toll that it is still taking on our men and women in uniform. My brothers and sisters, so many of whom are still serving in harm's way right now. You know, what they're doing is not very often in the headlines until you get a brief mention, as we did recently when 2 more soldiers were killed in Afghanistan. You'll hear a headline about what happened to them, but what you don't often hear is the life that they've left behind. Wives, husbands, mothers, fathers, kids. That as they paid the ultimate sacrifice, the vacuum, the empty space that they leave behind will never be filled. Yesterday, I had the privilege of speaking to the young widow of one of those soldiers who was killed. He was a helicopter pilot, and their helicopter went down, who's from my district in Hawaii. He and his wife had just been married not even a year ago. I was blown away by the strength that came from her voice as we had this conversation, and how she promised that she would never let anyone forget who her husband was and how much he loved this country. We must never ever forget those servicemen and women and their families who sacrificed dearly for this country. There's a price that every single American pays for these years-long regime change wars of choice, unnecessary wars that unfortunately our country's been waging since 9/11. We, the American people, have spent over $6 trillion, not on wars, primarily on wars that have made our country less safe. Regime change wars like we've seen in Iraq and Libya ongoing in Syria that have actually strengthened terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, undermining our national security. What does that mean? $6 trillion is a lot of money. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around. In Afghanistan now, just in Afghanistan alone, we are currently spending $4 billion every month. $4 billion every month. And you start to think about, okay, what does that mean to, maybe your local community, and how much it would cost to build better roads, how much it would cost to make sure that every child in need of a special education teacher is able to get that mentorship and that care from that teacher. What does that mean for our ability to be able to provide mental health professionals and resources to those who need it most within our communities? When you start thinking about all the things that just in your everyday life, maybe you read in the newspaper, you think, gosh, why don't we have our taxpayer dollars going to meet that need? Why are these basic things such a struggle in our own communities? And yet we see this seemingly endless amount of money coming out of our pocketbooks, out of our wallets, to go and pay for wasteful regime change, dictator toppling wars that have nothing to do with the national security interests of our country. In fact, they go against them. They are counter to them. And so now we're in a situation where we've entered into a new Cold War and nuclear arms race. We have escalating tensions with the United States and Russia and China. Nuclear strategists have put the doomsday clock, I think it's 2 minutes to midnight, pointing out the existential threat that we face of nuclear catastrophe. And so this nuclear arms race, this is being kicked off as Donald Trump tore up the INF Treaty, that was negotiated by Reagan and Gorbachev, something that people said was impossible back when they were working towards accomplishing this. But they did it, and they made our country and the world more safe by doing so. That's in the trash bin. There's another treaty, the New START treaty, that's in place to work towards de-escalating tensions and non-proliferation efforts, that's due to expire in February of 2021. This administration has made no efforts whatsoever towards re-upping and reauthorizing that treaty, pushing us farther and farther in the wrong direction. We had a huge wake-up call in Hawaii last year about how serious this threat is. Early on a Saturday morning, our state civil defense put out an alert all over text messages, the radio, television, telling the people of Hawaii, missile incoming, seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. How many of you saw the news or know what I'm talking about? Because that just pointed out not just a threat to Hawaii, but really to our country. Well, that turned out to be a false alarm. It really showed the reality of the threat that we face, where there, at that time, we thought our loved ones had 15 minutes to live. And when they started running around looking for shelter, it said seek immediate shelter, there was nowhere to go. I want to ask you here, if we got that alert here right now, this afternoon, where would you go? How many of you know? Raise your hand. How many of you know exactly where you would go or what you would do? Because there is no shelter. There is no shelter. Our leaders have failed us, creating this situation where we are facing this threat of nuclear catastrophe. There is no shelter, moving farther and farther in the wrong direction. This event that happened to us in Hawaii was a huge wake-up call for us all. It was a major reason why I decided to run for president. To provide the kind of leadership, bringing the experience that I've gained through nearly 7 years in Congress, working on the Foreign Affairs Committee, working on the Armed Services, the Homeland Security Committees, meeting with world leaders, working with different military commands, providing oversight over the Department of Defense, the Department of State, working in these areas of national security and peace, that have equipped me to be able to walk into the Oval Office on day one to fulfill that responsibility of Commander-in-Chief of our armed forces, to bring about the kind of sea change in our foreign policy that we need so desperately. As your President Commander-in-Chief, I will end these regime change, dictator toppling wars, make sure we don't start any new ones, work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, and redirect our taxpayer dollars back towards actually serving the needs of our people and our communities right here at home. This is my personal commitment to you. Our campaign is a people-powered campaign. We take no PAC contributions or lobbyist contributions. And if you've been paying any attention to not only the message of our campaign, but the work that I've been doing throughout my 7 years in Congress, you know that I will stand strong in my mission of serving the people of this country and will not bow to the foreign policy establishment or the political establishment or the military-industrial complex. They will not distract me from that mission, where every single day you know that I wake up ready and eager and focused on serving you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and I look forward to our conversation here. We've got Vince in the back who's got the microphone. Right here, Vince. We've got one up here in the front. You can just wait just 1 second.
Congresswoman, the United States Constitution, the founders of this country gave to Congress the power to fix the standard of weights and measures. That's one of the powers in Article 1, Section 8. And in 1866, Congress passed a law saying that people in the United States have a right to use the metric system. But that doesn't do much good when the states are still free to post mile-per-hour speed limits and force the grocers to post unit prices in quarts. And worse than that, when my wife filed for United States citizenship, the application instructions say, write down your height in feet and inches. Do not use metric units. Can we, the people of the United States, count on President Gabbard to secure the blessings of the metric system to ourselves and our posterity, or would you be on the side of the ignoramuses who are proud that they don't even know the metric system?
Whoa. I think you've got a lot of people here on your side on this one. I wouldn't use such strong language myself.
Passionate.
I'm not used to using the metric system. I hope I don't fall in the ignoramus category. Look, this is not a conversation I've ever had with anybody. I think it's great that we're starting this conversation here today, and perhaps we should have this dialogue as a country so we the people can make sure our voices are heard on this issue. Thank you for raising that. That's one of the best questions I've ever gotten. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm a physician. I have a question about healthcare access. Our country, our people have financed the most modern medical technology in the world, but we cannot access it. I work at the VA and I'm proud because I know no one goes bankrupt getting healthcare there.
Thank you for your service and taking care of our veterans.
My father was a Vietnam vet. My medical school invented the checkpoint inhibitor, which is one of the cures to cancer, and people cannot access it in the state of New Hampshire. And I think that's wrong. What would you do to help them?
Thank you. I agree with you. It is wrong. We have some of the best innovations in this country that are too often reserved for only those who have the money to be able to get that care, regardless of those who may need it desperately. But if they don't have the right job, or if they don't make enough money, or don't have the right health insurance, then they're out of luck. And sometimes with very devastating consequences on their lives, the lives of their loved ones. This is why I strongly believe our country needs what I would call a single payer plus healthcare plan that would guarantee every single American gets not just that access, taking the word access out of it, is able to get the care, the quality care that they need. We have the best to offer in this country. And rather than thinking about the profits of big insurance or big pharma, we're actually building a healthcare system that puts the health and well-being of our people first and delivering that care to them wherever they are. I think this is the mandate that we have. This is the guarantee that everyone needs to be assured of. If there are people who would still choose to purchase private insurance on a supplementary basis, or would maybe have their employer who offers them good health care insurance, they should obviously have the freedom to be able to do that. But that does not detract or undermine in any way, shape, or form that every single person automatically, this is not a public option, that every single American is guaranteed that health care, that quality health care, the best that our country has to offer. Thank you for your service. And I think just to close out on this point, you have my personal commitment that big insurance and big pharma will have no seat at the policy-making table in my White House. Yes, sir, in the green shirt. Hold on for the microphone. We want to make sure everybody can hear you. What's your name, sir?
Hello, my name is Sam, and as a descendant of an Armenian genocide survivor, I thank you for voting yes to commemorate the Armenian genocide. You said the denial of the Armenian genocide has had a contemporary consequences. What consequences?
Thank you, Sam, for raising this very important issue. First, let me just say I had the privilege of joining a congressional delegation to go and actually visit Armenia, where we had the chance to meet with descendants like yourselves of this Armenian genocide, where we heard directly from them how this generations-long denial of that genocide leads to the continuation of innocent people being slaughtered in a genocide, whether it be because of their religion or their ethnicity or their race. What we are seeing now that has begun to occur in Syria with Turkey. Donald Trump moved our troops from the northern border of Syria on almost a moment's notice, putting out a green light for Turkey to begin their invasion and occupation and ethnic cleansing of the Syrian Kurds. This is why that legislation was so important for us to get passed through Congress, to recognize, to make sure that the United States and the world knows that we recognize that that genocide occurred against the Armenian people, against the Assyrian people, so that we can do all that we can to make sure that these genocides no longer continue in the world. Unfortunately, this legislation that you referenced, Sam, is currently being blocked in the Senate. It's being blocked in the Senate. And I can tell you that as we have seen these efforts to recognize the Armenian genocide in the past, they have failed because we have leaders in our government who care more about offending Turkey than they do about doing the right thing and recognizing this genocide and bringing the story of your ancestors to the forefront to prevent this from happening again. I think that is wrong and offensive in the deepest possible way. And we need to hold those leaders accountable. They've got to get their priorities straight.
Hi, Tulsi. I'd like to thank you for your service, both as an officer in the armed forces and in challenging this country's corrupt foreign policy establishment. So, at an earlier event, you were gifted a documentary exposing Israel's role in the 9/11 attacks. And I was wondering, have you gotten a chance to watch this documentary? And if so, has it convinced you that not only has the CIA collaborated with Al-Qaeda, but Mossad as well?
I have not watched the documentary. I would like to talk about some folks who I'm working with right now with regards to the attacks on 9/11. A little over a month ago, I was approached by family members of those who were killed in the attacks on 9/11, and they asked for my help because for so long now, they have been struggling trying to get documents from within our government related to the FBI investigation as to who was aiding and assisting the hijackers who launched those planes into those buildings on that day. The FBI led these investigations, coalition of local New York Police Department detectives and other law enforcement agents who were investigating what exactly happened, who was involved, who put these people up, what went into the years that led to those attacks. These families have seen the door shut at them at every turn. Once again, leaders who are not putting the interests of the people of our country first. This is wrong, and this needs to change. This is why I'm standing with them. I've introduced a resolution calling on our government to declassify and to release these documents, both to bring about closure and justice for these families who are looking to hold accountable those responsible. Congress passed legislation years ago that I voted for that would allow these families to file a lawsuit even against a foreign government, in this case Saudi Arabia, to hold them to account. But they've not been able to do so because our government won't release the facts and the information and the evidence that they have in hand. This is about those families and those survivors, those first responders, survivors, but it's about our own national security and the American people and our fact that we deserve to know the truth. So this is something that I want to ask all of you to stand with me on. This is something that unfortunately has gone forgotten for a very long time. But meanwhile, you have these children of those who were killed in the 9/11 attacks who were still honoring their loved ones who were killed and still seeking truth and seeking justice.
Thank you very much, Tulsi.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, we're going to go on to another question. We don't have very much time. Yes, sir.
ANCreport.com.
There you go.
ANCreport.com.
So recently, Facebook has announced their new cryptocurrency, and it feels like just by the day they're growing as a really powerful monopoly. So I wanted to ask you, like, what are the consequences of having a monopoly like Facebook thrive in the United States? And do you plan to be kind of like a Teddy Roosevelt when it comes to just taking them down?
And what you're talking about is really dangerous, because we're already seeing how we really have these big tech monopolies, right? You've got Google on one hand. Google is the most used search engine in the United States and in the world. I think close to 80% of us use Google as a search engine. They own YouTube. A lot of us use. How many people see stuff on YouTube? You've got Google on one hand. You've got Facebook on the other hand. Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, who talked about running for president last year, if you remember, he was talking about it and saying, okay, he's going to turn 35 in time to be able to run this year. He didn't end up running for president, but he now wants to create his own currency that he would control. We have antitrust laws in place to deal with big monopolies that are in a position to abuse their power. And I think that we need to use those laws, make sure that they are applicable to these big tech monopolies. Because when you look at it, you've got a lot of power within the hands of just a couple of people. And what does that power allow them to do? It allows them to decide what pops up in your search engine. Decide what kind of information you're seeing or not seeing. Deciding whose voices are heard and whose maybe are canceled for one reason or another. This is something that we in our campaign experience in a pretty direct way, where I'm filing a lawsuit against Google right now because of this abuse of power. We had, during the very first debate of this presidential election, we had hoped that I would do well and that people would want to look for my name and say, okay, who's Tulsi Gabbard? Let me find out more information. So in preparation for this, we had our Google Ads account set up, went through and checked all the boxes, had all these things pre-approved, ready to go. Turned out I was the most searched candidate of that night, and have been every other debate since.
Woo!
But the problem was that as I was the most searched candidate, all of a sudden our Google Ads account was suspended without any explanation of saying, hey, you did this wrong, fix it, and then we'll put your account back up. Nope, we didn't get any of that. So our tech guys, they were calling, emailing, they're trying to figure out, hey, tell us what we gotta do. We wanna get this back up as quickly as possible. We didn't get a response for a long time. We started to get a response. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. We started hearing different things from different people. And then all of a sudden, eventually our account was reinstated without really any explanation about why it was taken down in the first place. So when you think about a company that has the power to inject itself in interfering in our fair elections process, our democracy, our public discourse, to a sitting member of Congress running for the highest office in the land, you can see what kind of power they have to do this to anybody, whether you're running for office, for local school board, or anyone who's trying to get information out in front of people. So I think there are very serious threats here that exist both to our freedom of speech and public discourse, as well as to our civil liberties and privacy. And in both of these areas, I think government has a role to play to be able to make sure that we don't allow for that abuse of power, that we protect our rights as consumers, and that we're protecting our private information.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for going on Fox News.
Thank you.
I saw you on Tucker about 4 or 5 times.
Good, I'm glad.
Reach out.
I'm actually a diehard Republican, and that's what opened me up to starting to listen to you.
Thank you.
I actually compliment you. You spoke very well each time you were spoken. I was grateful Tucker actually gave you time to speak as opposed to 20 seconds you hear from most people. There's also on Fox that I heard Geraldo Rivera came on one point when you were being attacked, and he apparently was covering Afghanistan when you were over there.
I served in Iraq, but
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
I knew you were overseas, but he
Yeah.
spoke extremely highly of you. Said you were a very brave person and he just thought very highly of you. So again, I'm listening more to you. I have one real concern, because I've heard you speak about getting out from Afghanistan, but I've heard soldiers on TV saying, if we don't go there to the terrorists, they're going to come here.
Sure.
So I guess that's my one question I haven't heard you answer.
It's a
that
good
I'd
question.
like to- Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. On your first point, I go on Fox News, I go on MSNBC and CNN, because my goal and aim is to speak to all Americans, because my hope is to serve all Americans.
Woo!
That's what it means to show respect to each other, where you and I may end up agreeing on some and disagreeing on other issues, but you know that I respect you and the responsibility that you have as a voter to decide what kind of future you want for our country. Your question about Afghanistan is really important, because I think there's a distinction that's necessary to be made between our troops having a never-ending occupation in a certain country, and the question that we should be asking about whether that's necessary and does it serve our national security interests or not. And then looking at, okay, well, what is our national security interest? And you're concerned about the threat of Al-Qaeda. I agree that it's necessary for us to be able to take out and defeat those threats early on before they're allowed to continue to grow, unfortunately, which is what we're seeing happening in Syria right now, where Al-Qaeda and the other jihadist terrorist groups that are there, they control an entire city in northern Syria, the city of Idlib. And so they've grown to a much greater place and stronghold. This is where al-Baghdadi went to hide out, in this city of Idlib, controlled by Al-Qaeda. So that's why it's important that we try to root out these threats before they build and they grow to that point. Continuing to keep thousands and thousands of troops in Afghanistan, in my opinion, is not the best way to achieve that objective. Because that's really not what most of our troops are doing there right now. They're still focused on a nation building mission or dealing with the Taliban and other things in Afghanistan, really issues that need to be left to the Afghan people and the Afghan government. I believe that those negotiations should resume for them to determine what kind of governance structure they want for their future. If our concern is about Al-Qaeda and a terrorist threat to our country, I think that we should have maybe a small regional force that's able to quickly deploy, take out a threat, and then leave, rather than have thousands of troops occupying all of these different bases across the Middle East. This would be far more effective. It would take less of a toll on our troops. It would cost us less as taxpayers, and it is the superior strategy for us to accomplish that objective. I'm going to take one last one here. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. 1 second.
I'm sorry. Thank you. As president, if you are looking toward facilitating a two-state solution for the Israelis and the Palestinians, what would you do to ensure that President Abbas and the Palestinian people would accept to live side by side with an Israeli Jewish state, and also allow Jewish people to be able to visit the holy sites in those areas and cities that have sites that are holy to the Jews as well as to Arabs and Christians?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I've been to Israel once and to the West Bank once on the same trip where I had the opportunity to meet with both the Israeli government leaders as well as some of the Palestinian leadership. And in the conversations that I've had then and since then in the years in Congress, I know and understand that I believe that we need a two-state solution and support efforts to accomplish that. It is through negotiations between the Israeli government and the Palestinian government that can accomplish that. I think that we in the United States can do all that we can to help support those efforts, to help facilitate those efforts, but I believe that any external dictating of the terms won't stand. I think it will actually undermine achieving what you're talking about, where you have the leaders in both countries representing the interests of their people and achieving a negotiated outcome that both sides will respect and abide by. I think that's absolutely essential. I think unfortunately some of the recent steps taken by the Trump administration have really undermined any existing prospects towards those negotiations resuming. I think it's pushed this effort farther off track than maybe it was previously. So I think there's a lot of work and a long way to go towards doing that. And I think that we in the United States should help to do what we can to try to bring both sides back together again to resume these talks that are necessary towards achieving a two-state solution where the Israeli people and the Palestinian people can live in a peaceful, stable, secure society and in a place that they both can call their home. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you all taking the time and the discussion that we've been able to have here today. I want to bring Vince up on stage here in a second. He is one of our incredible volunteer leaders who is leading the way to continue to build our people-powered campaign all across New Hampshire. We need your help. And so I want to ask Vince to come up and just share a few words about why he's doing what he's doing and how you can join the fun.
Hey guys, I'm Vince. Tulsi is very flattering, but the reality is I am a civilian. I am one of you. I live in New Hampshire. I've been in Nashua for 6 years. She jumped on my radar in 2015, like for a lot of people here, I'm sure. So when she had announced she was running, I thought it was going to be a sure thing and there would be no issues. I didn't quite understand how the media worked. I was young still, only a few months ago, but whatever. But you know, I turned it on and I started thinking, I'm healthy, I'm 30 years old, I'm able-bodied. If I don't get up and do this knowing this is a candidate who's not taking PAC money, who else is? So I put my name in at tulsi2020.com. I got called the next week to SignWave, and now I'm doing a few other things in between work. But the idea is now is, you know, we're trying to start a movement. So, you know, today you signed in. There's some yard signs on your way out if you want. You can donate. We got merchandise. But if you really want to join this cause, if you want to stay connected past today or past any other time Tulsi's in town, sitting on your or underneath your chairs, or you may be sitting on them, I don't know. But we call them pledge cards. And the idea on that is, if you want to commit today to talk to 2 people in the next 2 days, or if you want to throw a house party, if you want to commit to yourself, right? You don't have too much time, you're raising a family or whatever. You want to commit to, I'm going to pick up every single phone that calls me, whether it's unanswered or not. If it's a pollster, I'm going to say Tulsi. Everything in between to that. You want to stay connected, write it down on that, and I will call you personally in 2 days and see how else we can work together to help Tulsi out. And so at the end of today, take your cards. If you're interested, leave them with Dasi at the sign-in table in the back on your way out. And I hope to call every single one of you. There's a lot of people here. But with that, Tulsi's short on time. She's got a holiday stroll to go to this evening, so I'll turn it back to her.
Thank you so much, Vince.
Thank you.
Vince is modest. He tells me he has a job, a day job. I have a hard time believing it because whenever I see him, he's out, pounding the pickets and putting the signs in people's yards and making phone calls and working really, really hard to help raise awareness, making sure people know who Tulsi Gabbard is, why I'm running for president, helping to spread our message. And I really invite you to come and join us so that together, working side by side, we can bring about this vision that our founders had for our nation. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here today. It's wonderful to see all of you. I'm going to be able to stick around for a little while if you want to come up and just say hi or take a picture or something like that. I'd love to see you. I think you can line up on this side of the room and be able to share our aloha together for a few more minutes. Thanks again to all of you for being here. Thanks to St. Anthem for hosting us, all of our volunteers. Thank you all so much.